You are sitting around the table. Maybe it's after they were in the hospital, maybe after a fall, maybe after another financial disaster, maybe after somebody finally said, we can't keep doing this. And now there is a real decision sitting in the middle of the room, not a theoretical one. Something has to happen. Maybe it's about care. Maybe it has to do with living arrangements, maybe medicine, maybe their safety, maybe the financial situation. And somewhere in the conversation, someone in the family says, okay, who actually has the authority to decide this? Hey, Christian Care Companion. Welcome to Dementia Caregivers Support for Christians, the podcast for faith-driven caregivers and Bible-believing Christians who want to honor God and care well in this season. Okay, who actually has the authority to decide? This is a very common situation. I want you to imagine everything is slowing down. Now the folders come out. The drawers get looked through. People are searching on their phones. Somebody says there's paperwork from years ago. Somebody else said, I thought your brother had it. Another person said, no, I think mom changed that. And now everyone is looking, reading names, looking for signatures, trying to figure out dates, trying to understand what was signed, what wasn't signed, what was updated, what might not even exist. And underneath all of that is one growing realization. Nobody can clearly answer who has the authority to make the decisions. This particular situation is incredibly stressful for families because by the time this usually happens, the caregiving situation has already become more serious. We're not discussing preferences anymore. We're discussing things that affect their care, the safety, their money, the housing options, medical decisions. What do we do next? And families often discover this problem in the exact moment when the decisions can no longer be avoided. And that is what makes this so emotionally difficult. Because many caregivers assume that authority is already settled somewhere in the background. And if they just look hard enough, they'll eventually find the document and everything will become clear again. So you keep looking. You call the attorney's office. You check the files. You contact the bank. You ask your siblings. You reread paperwork you barely can understand or see. And honestly, sometimes families stay in this search mode for a very long time because looking and searching and trying to find the information is easier than confronting what that not finding the document may actually mean. Because underneath all of this is a much deeper issue. Your caregiving situation has possibly by then evolved into a point where authority now matters for day-to-day operations, not just someday operations, not theoretical things, but what do I do today? And many Christian families struggle deeply here because they're trying very hard to preserve the peace and avoid conflict. Maybe you have a sibling who's not a believer, or you're the one who has the decisional capacity and you do not want to appear controlling. Nobody wants to overstep. Nobody wants to dishonor their parent. Nobody wants family division, family drama, family conflict. So oftentimes families remain very vague for much, much longer than the situation can safely actually tolerate. Meanwhile, guess what? The decisions actually just keep coming. And that's important for you to realize, because dementia isn't going to wait simply because we don't know who has the authority to make the decisions. Those care needs are going to continue to increase. The bills still have to be paid. Medical decisions may still need to be made at that moment. Somebody has to coordinate the care. Someone is still carrying the responsibility when things go wrong. And eventually we realize something very painful. If authority is not clearly functioning in your family, the burden is falling informally onto whoever is closest, whoever's the most vocal, the most available, the most willing, or the most loud. Not because your care system was designed in that way, not because a plan was put in place, but because the situation will not stay empty for long. This reminds me of the parable of I forgot where it is in the Bible, of the house that was swept clean and the demons, left. Um, and there was a vacuum and they came back in, right? Because situations will not stay empty. The vacuum will not be there for long. Someone is going to carry it. And often they are carrying this responsibility without clarity, without legal protection, without family agreement or authority to make them. And this creates instability inside your family, because now every major decision becomes an emotional conversation. Every conversation is harder. Every next step is delayed. Every disagreement becomes more challenging. And many caregivers keep trying to solve this as just a paperwork problem. But often what they're really not seeing is that the family system has not adapted to the level of decision making that is now required. That is a very different thing, because once things change and dementia progresses far enough, authority is no longer an abstract concept. It is a functional requirement. Who can talk to the doctors? Who can access their accounts? Who can sign the documents? Who can decide about care? What happens if the siblings disagree? What happens if the person living with dementia no longer understands what's being decided? This becomes unavoidable. And this is one of the places where Christian caregivers often experience the most internal conflict, because we want to do it well. We want to honor our spouse. We want to honor our parent. If you're a wife, you want to submit to your husband. We want to love them well. We usually avoid unnecessary control, but we're also seeing and watching the changes, the confusion, the risk, the increased complexity. And while nobody is saying clearly who is actually responsible for making decisions to move forward, that particular tension is exhausting to families, especially because many families continue to hope that clarity will emerge over time. The repeated confusion about who has the decisional authority usually will tell you something important. We have been talking lately about patterns. Patterns matter. Patterns are a part of this process, because when you see these patterns, you'll see them everywhere. If every important decision keeps collapsing back into uncertainty, if every single conversation keeps circling back to, wait, who can actually decide? Then your family caregiving structure may no longer be holding. And this is one of the hardest realities for families, and that is recognizing that avoiding this authority question does not eliminate this authority question. It just kicks it down down the road. It pushes this into a crisis later on, because eventually somebody's going to be hospitalized. Somebody's not going to pay a bill. All of a sudden, overnight placement may become emergent. Somebody becomes unsafe, or the person with dementia declines to the point where they no longer can decide who is in charge. And if that happens, you have a legal nightmare on your hands. So, the lack of clarity becomes impossible to ignore. This is why I encourage you to pay attention when the same thing keeps coming back. I don't want you to panic. I just want you to be aware. I want you to see and recognize that these repeated patterns are an indication of something changing, because most families are trying to solve the visible issue right in front of them, while often there's another issue underneath that is quietly changing your reality. And so the question then is no longer necessarily, where's mom's paperwork? Sometimes the deeper question is, what actually needs to be in place so decisions can move forward? Those are different conversations. If your paperwork isn't in place, you need to recognize that that is something that you need to do today. And for many families, recognizing that shift is the beginning of clearer discernment, better stewardship. Not because all of a sudden there's no more conflict, not because things are suddenly easier, but because we finally begin to look directly at the pressure points underneath this repeated situation. And often that pressure point has been there a lot longer than what people want to admit. Sometimes the most important shift in your caregiving is just recognizing something is changing. And maybe we need to start thinking differently about what care now requires. So, if you are ready to stay connected to this work, I invite you to go to thinkdifferentdementia.com and look at the situations we have on our website and see where you are struggling. Look and see what is changing and decide in your situation what you need to do next. And as I end all of my podcasts, may the Lord bless you and keep you, and I will see you in our next episode.